Is the fitness industry dead? Meaning specifically YouTube fitness, social media fitness. A friend of mine asked me this the other day, and I had some thoughts. And a few people have asked me my opinion on where the fitness industry is at today. So I figured I'd give my opinion on the whole thing. Do I think it's dead or dying? The short answer is actually, surprisingly, no, I don't. I think the fitness industry as a whole is one big revolving wheel, kind of like fashion, how things will fall out of fashion and then 20 years later kind of come back in line. Fitness kind of follows that, and I'll explain in a second. A lot's just changed. Let's back up for a second and let's recap the entire YouTube fitness from start to finish. Obviously, the fitness industry as a whole has been around forever, since the days of Eugene Sandow and Joe Weider starting Flex Magazine and Arnold Schwarzenegger making the encyclopedia to bodybuilding. But we're talking specifically about the social media era of it. YouTube fitness, which now umbrellas all the social medias, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, etc. The world of fitness influencing started basically back in 2007. In 2007, YouTube was only a couple of years old, just getting started, just getting popular, and there was only a handful of YouTube influencers, for lack of a better name. And it was the OGs, Scooby, Scott Herman, Vince Del Monte, Mike Chang from Six Pack Shortcuts. That was basically about it. Hodge Twins came in like 2008, I think, the following year. For those few years, the style was a hard camera like this, a fixed camera that you stood in front of and you just gave information or you demonstrated a workout. Each video would be entirely from start to finish dedicated to teaching you one specific thing. So if the video was how to get big biceps, the camera would be in a fixed position like this, and I'd be sitting here either explaining or demonstrating how to curl and get big arms, and that would be the whole video. Nobody was bringing you into their personal life yet. Nobody was breaking the video up into different topics and different subjects. It wasn't one part was in the gym, the next part was in your office, the next part's in a car. It was nothing like that. Each video was its own topic, and it was in a fixed position, and it was always impersonal but very educational. In 2009, I started the Eating Big series on YouTube. That's when I came onto the scene, and that was probably the first time fitness YouTube began vlogging. 2010 was kind of a cool year. 2010 is when a bunch of different YouTubers started popping up. This is when it started really catching on. We got Barthel Fitness, Dan Berg, Chad Taylor, Taylor Fitness, all the super OGs, you OG YouTubers remember. That was pretty cool. 2011, Matt Ogus hits the scene. In my opinion, one of the most influential fitness tubers there were. I think he really bridged the gap between the aesthetics side, which up until then, the whole aesthetics crew was pretty much only on forums, the Misk, the Z's videos. Matt kind of combined the aesthetic side with the informative side with the also personality side of things and really made a massive splash. Him and Chris Lovato started Legends of Aesthetics, which was huge. 2011 into 2012 was also the first time collaborations became a thing in fitness YouTube. I remember going to my first Arnold Classic in 2011 and linking up. I can't remember if this was my first or my second one. It was either 11 or it was 12. It was one of those 2 years, but I went, and one of those years I linked up with Barthel Fitness, with Chad Taylor of Taylor Fitness. One of those years I did an interview with Cody Lewis. And then in 2012, I was the first person to ever collaborate with Scott Herman. And at this time, Scott Herman was the heavyweight. He was the GOAT of fitness YouTube, and him and Scooby were like the two monsters. So at that time, it was massive for me to be able to link up with Scott. And he's still a good friend to this day. I love him to death. And it was cool. I was the first one to get to collab with him because collabs were not a thing yet. So that year was big. That was the first time YouTubers started getting together and collaborating together. 2012 was massive because that's when we got introduced to Chris Jones, Physiques of Greatness, him and Vince. Christian Guzman started his channel. At this point, TMW had grown to becoming the new heavyweights on the scene. They were killing it. They were getting like 100,000 views per video, I think, and were massive. And they were also the first channel to start using a DSLR with 1080p. I remember Max telling me at the gym once, did you see TMW's using 1080p? That's crazy. It was like a big thing back then. Speaking of Max, 2012 also saw Max Tuning and I finally link up and meet for the first time, which spread to Max starting his own channel. And that might have started more in like the start of 2013, but it was in that range when I was down there in Virginia. I got Max to start his YouTube channel, and boom, now Max Tuning is what he is today. So it's crazy how things work out like that. 2013, guys, was one of the biggest years for fitness as a whole. For some reason, I still to this day don't know what caused it. Fitness saw a massive mainstream explosion. I remember all of a sudden seeing every girl and guy I went to high school with suddenly start competing. Girls were starting to compete in bikini and figure, and guys were starting to jump on stage in physique divisions. Physique was really starting to blow up at this point too. It was massive. I remember even seeing celebrities were getting into it. I remember one of those teen mom girls was doing like a bikini competition or something like that. The Game had a 60 days of fitness challenge. It got a massive mainstream push that really exploded competing out into the mainstream. I don't know why, but it happened. And with that year, we saw heavyweights hit the scene. We saw C.T. Fletcher arrive on the scene, and he absolutely exploded. In my opinion, he was the first fitness YouTuber to kind of reach mainstream levels of notoriety. Not that he was a Justin Bieber or anything like that, but he was one of those guys where even if you weren't watching Chris Jones, me, Hodge Twins, even if you didn't know who those guys were, you probably had seen C.T. Fletcher. Like random people on the street had at least seen C.T. Fletcher, even if it was only in passing. He was becoming pretty damn mainstream. I think he was the first one to do that. 2013 also saw Rich Piana hit the scene. I remember seeing Rich back in the day at Muscle Beach, like in 2011 and 12 at Expos. No one knew who he was, but I remember noticing him because he was just crazy looking. All of a sudden, 2013, he's doing these viral videos with mutants. 2013 also saw Boston Lloyd really opening up about gear use, and that started exploding. 2013, I would say, was the start of the transition from when the biggest lines at Expos were the Mr. Olympia competitors, the IFBB Pro bodybuilders. Up until this point, to get famous in fitness, you had to be covered by magazines, or you had to have like bodybuilding.com doing a series on you, or you had to have like DVDs being sold of your training, like Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler did. That was how you got famous back in like the 90s, early 2000s. And the only guys who were covered in those areas were, of course, the pros in the sport, the top Mr. Olympia, the top professional bodybuilding competitors. After 13, we started seeing longer lines forming for YouTubers than we did bodybuilders. It was a crazy shift, and it's where magazines started taking the back seat and social media started really taking the front seat of things. I remember seeing the Hodge twins with like superstar long lines going out the door that like dwarfed any Mr. Olympia's line. It was nuts. I talked about the cycle of fitness. So this is where the attention, the overall focus, the hype shifted from the competitors, the top competitors of a sport, over to the personalities of a sport. That was the first big shift. Competitors go down, now it's personalities. Dana Lynn Bailey and Rob Bailey, flag nor fail was like the thing to wear. In 2012, 2013, you can go to a gym or a supplement store or an expo without seeing flag nor fail. They were kind of the first ones to create creative, personalized clothing. Before that, we had clothing brands, but it was like our names. 2014, that wheel turned again, and powerlifting hit the scene in a major way. 2014, Johnny Candido hits the scene with his channel, which in my opinion really opened the eyes of the public to raw powerlifting. Omar Isuf, he really shifted his gears hard into powerlifting and started doing a lot of features of elite powerlifters, tutorials on powerlifting. It was really, really cool to see. At the same time, I got inspired by Candido's channel. I had been looking for something new to try. I was getting burnt out from bodybuilding. I switched over to powerlifting. One of my favorite moves I ever made in my life, and it actually revamped my channel. My channel was starting to plateau at around 80,000 subs. Suddenly it goes up to 242,000 subs once I switched to powerlifting. It just exploded. And from there, we see top competitors in powerlifting start becoming YouTubers. Brett Gibbs makes an interactive YouTube channel. Josh Hancock makes an interactive YouTube channel, which up until now, we've only really seen just clips of PRs from these guys. So now we're seeing powerlifters get personalities. So again, this cycle is shifting now from just personalities in fitness with physiques over to powerlifting, which is pretty cool. Anyway, from 14 to 16, powerlifting's hot. Anything with a big lift goes viral. I did the videos with Eric Lillybridge, Pete Rubish, George Lehman. Each one of those videos blew up into the millions. I had a blast making those. Any PR I posted got hundreds of thousands of views. It was an awesome time to be a powerlifter. I'd say 2016 was probably about the peak of that. That was like the pinnacle of that. Raw powerlifting is still massive. It's still growing. I have to make this clear. You go to John Hack's page, he's blowing up. Rightfully so. He should be. He deserves it. When I say peak, I'm talking about just like the entirety of the fitness industry being focused on it. Like you could be into physique competitors, like you could be into like bodybuilding and not care about powerlifting at all, but during that 14 to 16 time period, you couldn't go on social media or on YouTube without something powerlifting related popping up in your feed, even if you didn't want it. That's what I'm talking about when I say peaked. So nowadays, raw powerlifting is still very, very hot. It's growing. It's only gotten bigger, but now it's like if you want to focus on classic physique or bodybuilding, pretty much all that's going to be in your feed. You're not going to really have anything powerlifting in your feed anymore. Nothing's getting shoved in your face anymore with powerlifting. That's what I'm talking about when I say the overall hype. By this point, it's 2016. Powerlifting is at its peak. CT Fletcher's super famous. The Rock even recognizes him. Rich Piana is nearing the end of his life. We know in hindsight now, rest in peace, and he was just absolutely massive. His movement was huge. His lines were out the door at Expos. 2016, Rob and Dana Lynn are still huge. CT Fletcher has his movie that just dropped. I mean, things are huge. In 2015 was actually the peak of my channel. That was the height of my channel. Fast forward to 2018. So powerlifting's kind of curved and died off as far as just mainstream coverage goes. Still growing, but now you post a video of a PR, it doesn't do that well in views. I remember capturing a video of Kevin Oak deadlifting 800 for a couple of reps beltless, and it got like 10,000 views. The world had become desensitized. Now in 2018, the main focus is clean video edits and entrepreneurialism. So all these guys that came up with me are now switching over to running their own businesses, being entrepreneurs, and showing the world how they do it, and showing it with crisp drone shots, high frame rate, slow-mo speed ramps. Any fitness content that was in the videos was now minimized. You get like a pocket, like a 60-second pocket of a workout, and it had to be filmed like a music video. Just straight up gym content was pretty much dead. The only ones who could still get away with it were either the freaks like Larry Wheels, who at this point had just exploded on the scene. Larry Wheels, he was my favorite channel in that time period. He was the only one who could just do straight gym footage and still have it do really well, because he was like the next generation Ronnie Coleman, just jacked and freaky and strong. Or it had to be shock value stuff, you know, Juji Mufu bench pressing 800 pounds on the edge of a building in a thong. Like that had to be attention shot clips like that. If it wasn't freaky like Larry Wheels or shot clips, lifting content was pretty much, you know, in the back burner, and entrepreneurial clean edits were the thing. I will say though, in 2018, we really saw a rise in the media coverage section. Dave Palumbo was the guy all this time, but now we see Nick Strength and Power's channel really blowing up. That's also when I started following Greg Doucette when he was tiny, a tiny little 20,000 subscriber channel. He was just getting started there, and we know how that went. 2020 was a really weird year. Obviously, gyms got shut down. The whole year feels like a blur. At this point in time, the wheel kept turning. The focus shifted onto freaky, strong people. 2020 is when Thor broke Eddie Hall's deadlift record, and there was a big back and forth going on between them, like 2 boxers before a match about it. 2020 is when Julius Maddox attempted the first raw 800-pound bench, and ESPN covered it, which is huge for powerlifting, and they misloaded it and screwed him over. Still devastating to this day. Coincidentally, 2020 is when I did all of my strongest lifts too, so there was something in the air that year that just strength was the focus. 2021, your boy Nick Wright retired from YouTube after a long haul. Sad moment of silence. And finally, here we are in 2023. Now, we've seen more of the scam artists like the six-pack shortcuts pop up with Liver King. In 2022, Liver King was the next guy to reach mainstream levels of notoriety. Of course, now it's more infamy, and it was very short-lived. Easy come, easy go. And if you're a 90s kid like me who grew up watching all the guys I've just named, you might see Max Tuning complaining how his views are no longer growing. You might see Christian Guzman no longer uploading to YouTube that much anymore. Chris Jones is kind of focused on his coaching content, doing his thing. He's in his pocket, but he's not really, you know, climbing the ladder of subscriber growth like by the hundreds of thousands anymore. And that's just the way it goes. All of us have kind of reached our heights as far as growth goes, like viewer and subscriber growth goes, and have now branched onto different things. Many people branching onto businesses. And there's still a lot of growth to be had in different ways. Chris has streamlined his coaching business. Max has created this new podcast channel that has mainstream celebrities coming onto it, so he's growing in that way. Christian has grown an entire empire. So it's not like they're done. It's just as far as the media side of it goes, you might say, okay, the ceiling has been hit and now maybe it's cooling off. It's just the smoke's clearing a little bit. And it might feel like that for you, especially too, if you're like me and now you're in your 30s and your priorities have shifted. Maybe you're no longer as obsessed with achieving that six-pack for the girls on the beach like you were when you were 20 years old and started watching us. Now you have a family. Now you have a job, a career, whatever it may be, different interests. And there's that old saying, you know, it's not really a saying, but when you buy a blue car, suddenly you start seeing all these blue cars all over the place. It's not because people suddenly bought new cars at the same time as you and they're blue. It's because now your brain subconsciously is looking for them. It's noticing them because now it's a new focus. Well, that's kind of how the fitness thing goes. Back when it was an obsession for you, you found us and we were obsessed too. Now all of us are older with new priorities shifting, and the fitness media side of it might be cooling down for us a little bit, as it probably is for you and your lifestyle. And you're probably not keeping an eye out for the new young up and coming channels, because why would you? You're just in a different place in life than a 22-year-old, and that's totally okay. That's like a rap fan saying rap's totally died because, you know, they grew up with 50 Cent, G-Unit, and Eminem, and now none of those guys are really putting out consistent music anymore. It doesn't mean rap's done. It's just that you're no longer paying attention to the new guys, because that's fine. You're in a different place, different era, and the guys you did follow are retiring. So it just feels like it's all wrapped up and done. But let's look at it for real. 2023, guess who the most followed fitness influencer on Instagram is? C-Bum, Chris Bumstead, with 17.5 million followers on Instagram. That's almost mainstream celebrity territory. That's massive. To the best of my recollection, the highest before him in the fitness industry was Simeon Panda. This was like in the 20 teens, and he had like 5 million back then when I checked. I don't know if it's higher now or what. And then like Kai Green was right behind him with like 4 million. So that's a massive jump. And Chris Bumstead happens to be 4-time Mr. Classic Physique Olympia. So here we are again, back where we were in the early 2000s, where the most famous guy in the industry is the top competitor, the Mr. Olympia in the actual sport. Just like back when Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler had the biggest lines. I love to see that. That's amazing to me. So that wheel left the pros, went all the way around to influencers, then powerlifting, then freaks of nature, and then now it's all the way back to the pro competitors in the bodybuilding realm again, which is really, really cool to see. But does that mean that the world of influencers is dead now? Far from it. Actually, I took a deep dive, guys. There are some crazy channels blowing up. You have Alex Eubank, who's a 22-year-old. I think he's 22. Don't quote me on that. Forgive me if I'm wrong. But he's early 20s, young kid. And he has massive numbers. He has like over 1 million on YouTube, I think, like 2.5 million on Instagram. I mean, these are bigger numbers than any of us, me or my peers, reached back in our heyday. Him and his girlfriend often upload little shorts on YouTube, and I love it. It reminds me of like the 2013 me and Ariana, back when we were that age. It's so cool to see, in my opinion. You got the Trend Twins, who are like these young guys, all jacked up. Their channel is almost like 1 million. I think they have like 500,000 on Instagram, or I might have that flipped. They have a huge following. Their views are absolutely nuts. Their view to sub ratio's nuts. You have Lean Beef Patty. She's like 4.5 million on Instagram, I think. You see her pop up everywhere now. Super viral. These are huge channels. It's still there, guys. It's just, you know, if you're in your 30s like me and you're kind of shifting your focus away from fitness a little bit, it's like you're just not going to be paying attention to maybe a 22-year-old coming up, and that's okay. That's not a knock on any of the young guys making content, because there's a bunch of young kids out there just getting into it, ready to watch them, same as when I was getting started. So the wheel's just turning, man. The cycle's turning. Everything's coming back just like fashion again. I think what you're officially seeing is the tail end of our generation. It doesn't mean any of us are done or washed up. Like I said, Max is paving a new way with the Don't Be Sour podcast. It's a slightly different avenue outside of fitness. It doesn't mean people are done growing and expanding. Just as far as the straight fitness content goes, I think our generation is finally cooling off now. We're reclining in our chairs a little bit now, and now you're actually seeing the actual genuine start of the real next generation. Last thing I will say, the reason why it probably feels a lot different too, and I think this is going to make a big difference, is with social media fully taking over everything now, we are seeing huge view and following inflation, as well as influencer inflation. What this means is there's more people becoming influencers or trying to, and there's more people watching too. And so now 1 million subscribers is kind of like what 100,000 subscribers used to be back in like 2012. Like back in 2012, if you had 1 million subscribers, you were like mainstream famous. Like Nickelodeon was like offering you deals, like you were Jenna Marbles. Now, there's a lot of channels that have 1 million subscribers, and they're still massive. Don't get me wrong. At 1 million subscribers, you're living a very comfortable career with your channel. You're getting a huge ass line at meetups and expos. I mean, you're killing it. But my only point is now someone can have 1 million channels, and you could be into fitness and still have never heard of them or come across them, because you're over here focused on this side of fitness. And fitness is now just so damn big that they can actually stay separated, which is just mind-blowing to me. And it really begs the question, where is the medium gonna go over the next 10 years? I swear I'm wrapping it up here, but back in the 90s and early 2000s, fame came from magazine coverage, DVDs, and early 2000s getting covered by online series like bodybuilding.com. Then throughout the 2010s, 20-teens, it was pretty much YouTube. YouTube and Instagram was just pictures. Now, late 20-teens, early 2020s, it's a lot of short form. Instagram Reels and TikToks, YouTube Shorts. And now it's so damn big that it's like, what would have had you taken over the entire industry back 10 years ago, following size-wise, just makes you another good YouTuber now. It's crazy. It's crazy. So I'm very curious, man. I'm curious. Like, the industry was small enough to where, like, you know, if you just even lifted weights, you had heard of, like, Chris Jones. Even if you didn't watch his stuff. Because he had a massive following at that time, and you couldn't miss him. Now, though, it's like, you could follow Chris Bumstead and not know who this YouTuber is over here, even though they have 1.5 million subscribers. It's wild. It's crazy how much has changed. So I think the wheel just keeps turning. The medium and the platform keeps changing, evolving, and growing, which changes the dynamic for fame. And I'm curious to see where it goes. Let me know what you guys think.